Good afternoon. We're delighted that you've joined us today again with One Heart for Israel. As we start a new series toward Easter, I want to spend the next 4 weeks with you, and I titled this A Journey to the Morning. The reason is I want to take us in the next 4 weeks on the journey that Jesus took from the conclusion of his ministry in Capernaum in Galilee to Jerusalem. And I want to show you some things that I think will help you understand that this purpose that Jesus came to save us was marked with things that we can understand all along the way of the following the footsteps of Jesus. And so today I want to take you on a very interesting journey. I want to take you from the home of Jesus' ministry in Capernaum in Galilee, right on the northern shores of the Sea of Galilee, to the city of Jerusalem and that trip that Jesus took, about a 3-day journey. Now, 3 days from the place where, after the first place he went to, I'll explain that in just a moment. Let me invite you to pray with us so that we can ask God to bless this time. Lord Jesus, as we follow in the footsteps of Jesus from the place of your ministry in Galilee to the cross today, I pray that you give us insight and understanding of the importance of what this journey is all about. How the signposts along the way invite us to understand, as we follow you, all that is included, all that is about, all that it demands. And so, Father, I pray that you just inspire us and help us to understand from our very souls the journey that Jesus took to the cross for us, what it meant to him, to you, and what it means to us today. Father, give us understanding and wisdom in this time. In your name, Jesus. Amen. So I want to take us to the place, and let me show you a map, first of all, of the difference between the Dead Sea and the bottom of Israel and the Sea of Galilee toward the north. Now, just to give you insight to this, the Sea of Galilee is up in the north, and it's in the area of Galilee. The Dead Sea is down in the area of Judah, and it begins the Arava, or the desert, going south of that. And you have the Way of the Sea on the green on the left, and then the Jezreel Valley is actually the green that runs from the west to the east, right there by the Word River that comes in from the Mediterranean, runs down to the Jordan River Valley. The red dot at the top is the city of Capernaum. It was on the northern shores of the Sea of Galilee, and it's where Jesus actually made his home for the 3 years of his ministry. Peter lived there. We have interesting stories of Peter healing Jesus healing Peter's mother-in-law there. This is where Matthew was chosen also as to be one of the apostles. And this is where Peter and the fishermen fished from. So it was their home also. So when Jesus walks along the shores of the Sea of Galilee and says, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men, they were fishermen in the village of Capernaum. It's where their boats were. And it was a major thoroughfare going from the north of Damascus down in through Israel to Jerusalem, and even down south into Egypt if you wanted to go that far. On the bottom of this, the red dot on the bottom, is the city of Jerusalem. And today I want to take you on the journey here of this map from Capernaum to Jerusalem. Now look at this map just a second again with me, and I want you to see that a couple of things. Number one is it's green around the Jordan River Valley. It's desert to the right or to the east, which actually heads toward Babylon, Mesopotamia. You have the hills on the left, which is called the Shephelah, and Jerusalem is in the hills. And so as we come down the Jordan River, I want you to just see there, it is very, very crooked. It is not a straight river hardly at all. It winds and it bends constantly all the way down to about this 80 miles going from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea. And so as we follow this journey, I just look at this map. I want you to understand there are many, many things and places along the Jordan River that we're going to talk about today. This was considered by the Jews the river of life. It ran from the Sea of Galilee, and there were 3 tributaries of water that ran into the Sea of Galilee, to the Jordan River, and it became a full Jordan River going from the Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea. But the Dead Sea is an area where the water does not run out of it. And the nutrients and the ground is so filled with salt there that the Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea. Nothing grows in it. The Sea of Galilee teems with life, and the fish in there are crazy. If you walk in the Sea of Galilee, actually fish come up and they kind of suck on your legs. It's kind of a goofy little thing that you feel when you go in there. It teems with life. The Dead Sea has no life in it. And so I want to take you on this journey from Capernaum to Jerusalem as the journey that Jesus is on his way now to the cross. He's performed his ministry for 3 years. People have asked him and questioned him. He began his ministry just right next to the city of Capernaum, where he is a place called the Mount of Beatitudes. It's just outside of the gates of Capernaum, where Jesus preached that sermon and began his ministry. And now he's about to leave Capernaum and travel to Jerusalem. So I want to show you kind of this is a shot of the Sea of Galilee itself. Many miracles were performed in and around here. You're actually looking at the northern part of the Sea of Galilee. It's just a breathtaking. Actually, you're looking at the southern part of the Sea of Galilee. It's a breathtaking view. So you're looking from the west to the east across. And right below you to the left will be the ancient city of Tiberias, which was a home of the Sanhedrin for many years. And so this is the southern tip of the Sea of Galilee. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous place. And so let me show you a map now taking you to Capernaum. In this map, it shows you the Sea of Galilee, Capernaum, and then it takes you north to Caesarea Philippi. Jesus went north. He went north before he went south to Jerusalem. Now, the scripture tells us that Jesus went north so he could get away from the crowds, because many thousands of people would follow Jesus with great expectation. He fed thousands. He healed everyone around him, as far as we know. And so he was performing miracles. He had signs and wonders. There's some amazing teaching. So people from the area of Galilee were following him. Even the scribes and the Pharisees in that area would follow him to try to trick him up, to try to find reasons to cause him issues, to destroy him, even to have him killed down in Jerusalem. So there's great opposition to Jesus in this area, and yet there's thousands following him. Okay, so this is the city of Caesarea Philippi that Jesus goes north to. He takes the apostles so he can get away from the crowds, because the crowds are not going to follow him. This about 30 miles north to Caesarea Philippi. I want to explain this city to you for just a moment. And by the way, the slides you see on this is actually the synagogue in Capernaum, and just a shot of the seaside in Capernaum. Let me take you to the next slide. The next slide shows you the journey that goes north, and you can see some of the other cities around this. Tiberias is down by the lake. The city of Magdala is just south of Capernaum. This is where Mary Magdalene came from. You have cities of Bethsaida and Chorazin, which was 2 cities that were very lively at the time, and Jesus cursed them because they refused to have faith and believe in him. The city of Nazareth is in the red down toward the left, so it kind of gives you a little perspective where we're going here. Tyre and Sidon are all the way off to the left on the Mediterranean Sea. And the Decapolis is on the right, south of this great river we're going to talk about in just a few minutes when we get down there. But going up to Caesarea Philippi. And by the way, there's also on this map, you can see the small city right next to that, the city of Dan, which is the tribe of Dan that was given the land down by Gaza by God when Joshua came into the land. They thought that there were giants in the land. They didn't think they could possess it. And so they left what God had given them and moved north to the city, to the area of Dan, named Dan, this area. And the very, very many problems that came along with that. But the city of Dan became, during Jeroboam-Rehoboam period, became a very, very, very pagan city. And it was not far from this place called Caesarea Philippi. Herod's son, after Herod the Great died, took possession of this land, and he built this city, Caesarea Philippi. Okay, Herod Philip did for an honor of Caesar. But it was actually in honor of the god Pan, which was half goat and half man. This is the primary god of this city, which was still in Israel. It was on the main thoroughfare, the Damascus road that led north. But this was a great, 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 great pagan city. And I want to show you a slide of kind of what it looked like. It was a very, very, very large city. But in this city, against a rock wall that was a cliff, they built temples in front of. One was to Zeus and one was to Pan. And on the temple on the left of your screen, there is a cavern that looks like it's back, and that was actually one of the underground tributaries of the water of the Jordan River that ran from the Mount Hermon underground and came up there. The Jordan River actually ran out of there. Now it still runs from underneath this mountain in Caesarea Philippi, and it's absolutely gorgeous, clear, clean river because it runs from underground. But they built this temple right in front of it. Now the interesting thing about that water that ran, the well or the water that ran from underground there, is the tradition was that the Jews and the Romans alike tried to find the bottom of that, and they could not find the bottom of it. And they called it, nicknamed, the Bottomless Pit. But the Jews, you see, considered the Jordan River the river of life. So you had quite a paradox in this city. You had the river of life running from this place, and yet you have the bottomless pit in this place. But it was a city dedicated to the god Pan. It was the most pagan city in all of Israel. It was actually nicknamed, as you would leave Israel and go out of this through the city to the rest of the world, it was nicknamed the gates of Hades. And Jesus brings his apostles to this place, and the story in the Gospel of John tells us this conversation that takes place in this city. Jesus asked the apostles in this most pagan city, "Who do men say that I am?" And Peter is always the first one to speak, and Peter replies, you are the Son of God. You are God. And Jesus replies, "Blessed are you, Peter, for flesh and bone has not revealed this to you, but my Father is in heaven, who is in heaven." And I'll tell you, on this rock, I'm going to build my church. And then he makes an interesting statement. He says, the gates of Hades will not prevail against this. Now, some people believe that it's actually the rock, and Peter was the rock, and because Petros is actually the Greek name for meaning stone. But I don't go there, because the place that Jesus is in is a rock city. And in the rock wall of this city, they had actually carved niches so they could put the busts of the gods on this rock wall. You see, this wall and this city represented all of the gods of Rome and the world. And Jesus comes and he says, listen, I know they have built on this rock, and they believe that this stone, okay, is going to last. But I'll tell you what, on this rock, I am going to build my church. Now, I think it's incredible that the first place that Jesus takes his apostles on his way to the cross is the most pagan city in the world. He tells them, you're going to build my church in places like this. What an incredible message that Jesus is telling the apostles. My church is not going to be built in safe places. My church is not going to be a church of just happy, wonderful things. My church is going to be built in the most difficult, the toughest places. And I'm going to call you to go to those places, to the dark places, to the lost places, to the pagan places, and build my church and become the church for the lost in those places. I think that was an incredible message of Jesus as the first step to the cross. I want to take you then to the next, as he leaves there, they travel for part of this on the Damascus road, the road to Damascus. This is this part of the ancient Damascus road. You know the story of Paul on his way to Damascus, okay? To find Jews in the city of Damascus, to bring down to Jerusalem and to persecute them, even to kill them if he could, because they were of a pagan a belief of Jesus Christ. And Paul had his confrontation with Jesus on the Damascus Road. Paul was never the same. I want you to look carefully at this road. It is not filled with restaurants, hotels, 7-Elevens. It has nothing on this road other than just the road on the way. Folks, listen to me carefully. Sometimes we travel roads like that. Sometimes we're on the road and Jesus has to get our attention on roads like that. Because we don't like to travel roads like that. We like to travel the comfortable roads. The nice, easy roads. But sometimes God brings us out into a road like that. Or sometimes we, in our own desires, our own passions, our own pride, take us to places where we end up in a place like that. And Jesus comes and meets us there, in a desperate place, and introduces himself to us again. Sometimes we need to take people on roads like that and introduce Jesus, because we have to get them away from distractions. And boy, if there's any place that's away from distraction, it's a road like that. As Jesus travels then, beginning to go south, he goes by some amazing places that are so important in the history of God's people, God's plan of salvation. They travel south and they pass a place called Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor is on this road of the Jordan River Valley going south, and Jesus passes here on his way south. This is the mountain where Deborah led the nation of Israel in a great battle, a miraculous battle, to defeat Sisera. And it's a really interesting thing, because Deborah has given instructions for the army to lead, and they said, no, we won't lead unless you lead us. And they could not defeat the enemy until, in front of this, you see the valley of Jezreel. And in this valley, right down in here, the great chariots came against the nation of Israel. And you could not defeat chariots if you were just on the ground. And so God caused great rain and water to fill up the Jezreel Valley, and the chariots got stuck in the mud, and now it was just army to army. But the great charioteers were not armed for a close-hand battle. And because God's miracle, Deborah won the battle, defeated Sisera, defeated the army, and Jesus passes this mountain and probably reminds the disciples as they talk past this mountain of, remember the story of Deborah and how the army could not stand against man's chariots, but just by the water in the ground, God was able to perform a miracle and win the battle. A little bit further south is Mount Gilboa, another incredible mountain. Now this is obviously just the opposite, because the story that took place here is when Saul, who God had turned his back on as the king, went to the top of this mountain to fight a battle. Right after he went to the Witch of Endor, which was just at the base of Mount Tabor, just across a small part of the valley. And they pass Endor, and Jesus, now they're passing Mount Gilboa. This is the location where, or very close to this that you see here in this picture, of where Saul and Jonathan were killed. And their heads were taken and put a little bit farther south in a place called Bethshean. This is two hills on the eastern end of the valley of Jezreel that Jesus passes on his way to the crucifixion, one of great victory of the people of Israel, that by a judge that leads them to victory, and then on Mount Gilboa where the king is killed. Wow. What stories. And then we pass on the other side of the Jordan River, we pass a place called the Jabbok River. A great, great place. This is the place where when Jacob had run from his brother Esau, had spent the years in exile and was coming back to meet his brother and coming back to the promised land, This is along this river, right in this location, is where Jacob puts his head down and falls asleep, and then an angel comes. And Jacob wrestles with an angel all night long. And this is the location where Jacob, after wrestling with an angel all night long, the angel says, "You will be called Israel." And he blessed him there. And I love the story because it says that the angel touched Jacob in the hip, and he never walked the same again. I got to tell you what, when you wrestle with God, you won't walk the same again. Now, maybe you won't limp, but you won't walk the same with God because God wins. But I got to tell you what, I want to encourage you in that story. I want to encourage you to wrestle with God. Wrestle with the text. Wrestle in prayer. Wrestle until God wins. Wrestle until he wins. Because when he does, you won't walk the same again. And I'm believing that as Jesus is traveling along the Jordan River on the way down south, he passes this river that runs into the Jordan River. Wow, imagine the apostles talking to Jesus about wrestling with Jacob all night long. And the story of how, from that spot, Israel was named as a nation. And so as he continues to pass south, looking back toward the west of the Jordan River, they couldn't see this from the Jordan River where they were, but it was just over the hill, above the Jordan River Valley, over the hill. And it was three places that are very incredible. One is the area, the ancient city of Shechem. Shechem, when Abraham was called by God to go to a place where he would show him, Abraham journeyed from Ur up to the Chaldees, and he came down to the city right here between two hills, Shechem. And this is where Abraham built his first altar in Israel to God. These two hills on both sides, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, became extremely important in the history of Israel because God told Abraham he would bless him in that place and give him the land, all the land that he walked. Years later, when Joshua brought the nation of Israel into the land, he brought them up to this area, and he put people up on the top of Gerizim and people up on the top of Ebal. And you can actually stand on those two precipices and you can shout across, and actually the acoustics are such that you can actually hear each other from the top of those two mountains. And so from the top of Gerizim, the people with Joshua shouted how God would bless them. On the top of Ebal, they would shout out, if they did not do what God said, the curses that would come. So it was shouting back and forth. You know, like when summer camp, we'd see who could shout the loudest, you know. Here's the blessing shouted and the curse shouted, and the blessing and the curse over the altar of Abraham. As Jesus passes down on his way to the cross, he passes this location, the place where the nation of Israel would hear the blessings and the curses of following or not following God, past the altar of Abraham. As we continue south, we come to a place where after Jacob crossed the river to see his brother Esau, he laid his head down. He had a vision of angels going up and down the ladder where Jacob laid his head. It's a place called Bethel. The city of Bethel actually means in Hebrew, house, Bet-El of God, house of God. This picture is what it basically looks like today, modern Bethel. Doesn't look like a house of God, does it? But it is called the house of God. The reason is because it was simply a place where God met man. God met Jacob there, and he blessed him. It was a place between heaven and earth where the angels descended and ascended on this ladder. The vision. I wonder if Jesus talked about that place to the apostles. You know, the house of God where Jacob laid his head and God came back and forth between heaven and hell, or between heaven and earth with the angels back and forth from Jacob, who is now called Israel, is right there, apostles. I'm on my way to give my life for all men. And I will become the mediator between heaven and earth in my sacrifice. As he continues down, there's a picture. I have a picture here of a place where the nation of Israel crossed the Jordan River. A place called Gilgal. It looks like desert. It actually is desert. It's kind of a mountain range. It runs north to south for several miles. It runs from the north down from about middle of the Jordan River down to actually the city of Jericho. This place, Gilgal, is a very interesting place. First of all, the nation of Israel crossed the Jordan River here in a miraculous crossing. And I can't help but Jesus would stop with the apostles and say, wow, this is where the nation of Israel came into the promised land. This is where Yeshua led the people into the promised land. Is this not what Jesus is doing at the time of bringing the nation of Israel through his sacrifice into the promised land? But as a nation came across the Jordan River, they encamped at Gilgal. They made their camp there until they could possess the land. They camped at Gilgal. Gilgal is where the nation of Israel celebrated the first Passover. It's where they encamped and became an army to capture the nation, the Canaanite lands, and it's where they would set their armies out from, and it's where they encamped to come down to capture the city of Jericho. This Gilgal is where Elijah made his home. It's where Elisha and Elijah worked together. There was actually a school for prophets in Gilgal. You know, at the time of Jesus, they thought there was probably about 30,000 prophets in Israel. There were schools, 3 major schools to become a prophet in Israel. If you wanted to become a prophet, you could get a degree in prophecy, being a prophet. Okay? And I have to tell you, I want to stop just for a second and say this. What became of the schools of prophets? If there were 30,000 prophets in the land at the time of Jesus, how many of them recognized Jesus for who he was? I want to tell you that we have a lot of people talking about prophecy today. And we are living in days of the fulfillment of the prophecies. No question about it. I believe with all my heart we're living in the very, 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 very last days. And we should have a good mind to the fulfillment of prophecies. We should study the scriptures and explore and examine and see how God is fulfilling these prophecies. And look for the answers that God wants to give us. The book of Revelation, that has a lot of prophecies of the end times, is the only book of the 66 books of the Bible that pronounces a blessing on the reader. Oftentimes I hear people say, well, I would read it, but I don't understand any of it. Well, you know what? I'll tell you how you understand the book of Revelation. The last book of the New Testament is study the first 39 books of the Bible, the Old Testament. For every single thing in the New Testament in Revelation is revealed in the Old Testament, especially in some of the books. Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, amazing things. But you'll find the answers in the New Testament. You'll find the answers of the New Testament in the Old Testament that reveal these things. But I want to take you to Revelation 19:10 just for a moment and just kind of conclude a thought on prophecy. John is being revealed in heaven, all these incredible things, and an angel comes, and John bows down to the angel and says, don't bow down to me, don't worship me. Worship Jesus and Jesus alone. He makes this statement that the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. If you want to dwell in prophecy in the last days, be a testifier of Jesus Christ. Study prophecy, examine prophecy, understand how it plays a role in today's world, but teach about Jesus, not about prophecy. For Jesus is the culmination and the completion of all of the prophets. It's not about what the prophecy is, it's who is prophesied about. So we in this place of Gilgal, where they had the school of prophets, so many things take place in the history of Israel. And Jesus walks through here. I wonder if he stopped just for a moment around a small pile of rocks. Small pile of rocks. Okay? I wonder if they stopped along the Jordan River and they looked at this, because the nation of Israel crossed the Jordan River. Joshua piled 12 stones up, and they put this pile of rocks there. I wonder if Jesus stood around this pile of rocks with his 12 apostles and said, see these rocks? These were piled up about the 12 tribes. You are the 12 apostles. And there is a pile of rocks. It said it was here to this day. Okay? I wonder if they stood around there and showed the apostles. Now you are the 12. And these were piled here by Joshua. And as we leave this place, you know, remember I said in Caesarea Philippi, on this rock, I'll build my church. And remember how you are now the living stones of this testimony? I think this is really an important place where Jesus could stop and, again, teach another lesson to the apostles and a lesson to us, that we are the living stones of this. Now, coming down the Jordan River, in the place of Jericho, you can look across the Jordan River, and just looking southeast, you can see a mountain there. And this mountain is Mount Nebo. And this Mount Nebo, this is a view from Mount Nebo. This is the place where God says that Moses stood on top of Mount Nebo, and he looked down and watched the nation of Israel go into the promised land. I can imagine a conversation with Moses before God buries him there, saying, you know what, God, I brought the nation of Israel to this place. Oh my gosh, did I bring them to this place? Watching them go into Israel, and you know, God, having watched them and walked with them for 40 years and led them, I can almost tell you what they're going to face in that land. I can imagine that Moses' heart for the people crossing into the land where they had to conquer the land to possess it. They would fight for that land for all time until the Messiah returned. I just can imagine how God revealed the story that would take place to Moses before he buried him there. I can imagine Moses praying for the people of Israel and God's people, seeing what they would face in the days ahead and how they had to overcome the forces of Satan. Wow. I can imagine Jesus looking up at Nebo, remembering the moment that Moses and Jesus met again on the Mount of Transfiguration with Elijah. It's one place from Gilgal, a couple miles away, to to Nebo, where Jesus walks through the place where Moses and Elijah lived. Jesus is probably reflecting on the transfiguration of when they met and talked about what he was going to face. Wow. And then there is the city of Jericho, the fortress city that was conquered by Joshua. The city that represented in the promised land, it was the first line of defense that the Canaanites put up against the Israelites. And in order for God's people to possess the land, they had to win the battle over the false gods and over those who worshiped the false gods. This was the first place of the first battle. And you remember how hard the Israelites fought. You remember that they stormed the walls day after day after day. You remember how it was so bloody. Oh no, actually it wasn't at all, was it? Actually, all they had to do was walk around the land that God said, if you walk around the land, you will possess it. I will give it to you. And all they had to do was follow the presence of God, the Ark of the Covenant, and give a great shout of worship, and the walls fell flat. And the interesting story that you read about that in the story of Joshua is when the spies go in and talk to Rahab. She says, listen, we have been terrified for 40 years of you people coming here. I want to tell you something. You may not be that scary, but the power of Christ in you will bring Satan to his knees. God comes through Jericho. Jesus passes through there. On the way, a man by the name of Zacchaeus, small in stature, but Jesus picks him out from the crowd. I love this typology here. The symbology of this is just so thick. It's crazy. Jesus calls to a man in a tree and says, come down, salvation has come to your house today. In a matter of a week, Jesus will be the man in the tree, bringing salvation. Instead of putting us on the tree, Jesus is on the tree, bringing salvation to our house. And then he heals Bartimaeus there in the city. A blind man. He heals a blind man, saying, in this place from here on out, I'll give sight to the blind. Almost symbolic. Watch what's about to happen. And if you can see, if you watch what I'm about to do, you will see salvation take place. Then there is the great walk up to Jerusalem. Oh, before I leave Jericho, Jesus would have passed this place. This was Herod's great palace in Jericho. A great palace. And he passes the palace. This was actually Herod's winter palace. That's what it was. He walks by Herod's palace. Wow, what a story of man building palaces and monuments to himself. He's about to pass this place. And imagine the conversation that would take place between the apostles and Jesus. Wow. Look at the leader of Israel, the king of Israel, that built this palace. He's dead now. His sons have taken now his place and don't do much with it because it's just an old monument. And as they turn from Jericho to go north, there is the Dead Sea on the left. It's an absolutely gorgeous place to go and visit. It's breathtakingly beautiful. But as you look at the Dead Sea, understand the reason that the sea is dead. It's kind of funny. It has the highest salt content of any body of water on the earth. The salt content of the Dead Sea is about 30% salt. Okay? So when you go in the Dead Sea, you float. It's so buoyant that you float. Nothing grows in the Dead Sea, but it's gorgeous. And you see these huge salt pillars. I mean, it's a beautiful place to see and visit and float on. But you don't, listen to me carefully, you don't enter into the Dead Sea with cuts or wounds because it burns so bad from the salt. I'd like to say that's a spiritual lesson also. Okay? And the reason that the Dead Sea is dead is because there's no outlet for the water to travel through. It just sits there in the salt. Now, it's true that they do take some wonderful soil from there and make it into great cosmetics for women, with a very minor bit of salt in that, I might say. In fact, even today, as the Dead Sea is beginning to recede so fast, and in years ahead, they're saying that there may not be hardly any water left because the water that flows through the Jordan River is being used for irrigation for people's use. So there's less water running into the Dead Sea. There are great holes, sinkholes, they're filling in around the Dead Sea. They're causing all around the Dead Sea. It's a very dangerous place to be today. Even though it's beautiful, it's a dangerous place to be. Then Jesus starts north, or he starts going west from the bottom of the Dead Sea, which is the lowest place on earth, 800 feet below sea level, to go up to 2,400 feet above sea level. So a 3,000 foot difference between where they are now. They're going to go up to Jerusalem, the city. They travel along this road called the Jericho Road. Now this actually is a picture of the ancient Jericho Road, okay? And it is not the current road today that is traveled on, because there's a great superhighway that runs from Jerusalem to Jericho. But this is along the ancient, called the Wadi Kelt. The Wadi Kelt was actually the ancient Jericho Road. You can see how it passes through the desert area from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And there's some small caves there on the left. It is filled with caves and places to hide. So it was a very dangerous road for people to travel as they would travel from Jericho up to Jerusalem. Also a very hot road. So the city of palms, called Jericho, people would cut off palm branches and they would use them for shade traveling along this Jericho Road. And just between this Jericho Road, as it runs from west to east down along that lineage going down to Jericho, the area on the left of that is a place called the Mount of Temptation, or the area of temptation. Okay, and this is where all scholars believe that Jesus was tempted for 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, this is the land of temptation. This is what it looks like. Okay, it's a desolate wilderness, and just Jesus lived here for 40 days and 40 nights. What a place. Imagine as Jesus passed this land of temptation. 3 years ago, Jesus spent 40 days and 40 nights alone in this area. He talked about this Jericho Road, about how this Samaritan walked down this road and was beat up. He told the parable of the Good Samaritans about how it took place on this road. And then Jesus climbs up this mountain, in this mountainous area. He comes to a small village that he passes. He passes the village of Bethpage. Now this is what it looks like today. It was actually a very, very small village during the time of Jesus. It was a stopover on the way to Jerusalem. It was on the lower part of the hill of the Mount of Olives. So from this place you could not see the village of Jerusalem. This was the village of the Sanhedrin. This is the village where the Sanhedrin would meet and make their political decisions and their religious decisions. Okay? The court would meet here at Bethpage. It is well believed by all the scholars that this is the village where the Sanhedrin would have met to decide that they were going to stand with the Pharisees against Jesus. And they were going to seek the destruction, the killing of Jesus from the village of Bethpage. They felt that it was a city of great knowledge for them because they're the Sanhedrin. They're very, very versed in the law of Moses. So this is the city that stood there as Jesus would pass by Bethpage. And a very short distance, quarter of a mile, half mile past that, before they would reach the ridge of the top of the Mount of Olives, and from the ridge they could see down the Temple Mount, see Jerusalem. There was one more village, the village of Bethany. The village of Bethany. Jesus would stay in this village when he came to Jerusalem. He had a very, very dear friend here by the name of Lazarus. In this village, Mary and Martha lived. But I want you to understand what this village was. It was not a regular village. No, actually, it was placed here on purpose, just on the other side of the ridge of the Mount of Olives, because they could not see Jerusalem from this village. You see, it was a city of lepers who weren't worthy to have a view of the city of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. Jesus made his home in a village of lepers. Now, Bethany in Hebrew means city of hope. Jesus actually healed a leper in this village. Can you imagine the news of the people of this village where Jesus had healed some lepers before. Hearing Jesus was coming back to the village. A village where Lazarus died. And Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead in this city of hope. And Jesus is coming to the city of hope to a people who are leprous and have no hope. And from this place are not able to have a view of the city of Jerusalem, the city of God, because they're lepers and they can't go over there. And Jesus comes to this place. The 3-day journey that Jesus took, coming down along the Jordan River to the city of Bethany. He would lodge here for the night. The next day, he would wake up and enter into Jerusalem with thousands of people following him, running alongside, calling out, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. But Jesus makes a journey from Capernaum, a place of miracles, a place of ministry, a place of gathering of his apostles, a place of bringing someone like Matthew back into his belief after he had left his belief and worked for the Romans, bringing someone like Simon the Zealot, who would do anything, including assassination, to uphold the law of Moses, and some simple fishermen. And after a ministry in Capernaum, he built them into a people, a group of men that would conquer the world with the message of what was about to take place. He showed them that he had, by his word, he could control the heavens and the earth and the winds and the storms. And by his touch, he'd heal the lame, the blind, and by his voice he could raise the dead. He takes them to the most pagan city on earth, Caesarea Philippi, and he says, get used to these places because I'm going to send you to places like this, and you're going to take and build my church. These places. And what is about to happen, you're going to carry the message of what's about to happen in 1 week to places like this and change lives and save the world. And as we travel this journey down to Bethany, let me just remind you of the stories of salvation that God has brought. We passed Tabor, where Deborah allowed God to win the victory there. We passed the river Jabbok, where a man wrestled with God and was blessed by him. We passed Gilboa, where the king who turned away from God was slain. We passed places like Gilgal, where the nation of Israel crossed into the Promised Land, and what they saw in the Promised Land was desert until they conquered it, until they planted in it. We heard reminded of the stories of Elijah, Elisha, Jacob, Esau, Israel, Herod the Great, who was no longer with them, another Herod that was eaten by worms. They saw the fallen walls of Jericho, of man that had tried to build a wall against God. Jesus told them about temptation facing Satan himself in that place. About how the first Passover by Israel was celebrated in the land there at Gilgal. And Jesus said, I can't wait to celebrate a Passover with you in another week's time. He reminded them that the Dead Sea, even as beautiful as it was, nothing lives in that water. For we've traveled the river of life down from Galilee to the Dead Sea, We'll turn and go up now this desolate road, the Jericho Road. Remind you of the story of who serves who on this road. We're going to pass the city, past the village of the Sanhedrin. Remind you that this is the men that are so steeped in tradition and in their opinions and in their law. I just healed a young man, a blind man, Bartimaeus, in Jericho. We're going to pass. We're going to come into a city that is blinded by opinions, by legalism, by their own bias, their own prejudice, their own pride. They're about to miss the story of the greatest thing that could possibly happen in the history of mankind. I want you to have vision and see what it is. I showed you that the man in the tree is not going to be Zacchaeus. I'll be the man in the tree, bringing salvation to the nations. I'm going to take you to a village here of Bethany. And we're going to stay among the most hopeless people on earth, the lepers, in the city of hope. They can't wait. That maybe when I come to that city, I will bring healing to them. Maybe Jesus will heal me from my leprosy. What Jesus is about to do is much, much more than heal one man of one disease. He's about to heal the world of all of our diseases. Come back and join me next week as we continue the journey to the rising sun. Lord God, as we bow before you today, we have all been on journeys. Remind us of the times when you have fought the battles and you have brought victory. Remind us of the times when we have failed and death has been right around the corner. But Father, as we walk along the river of life, that river is the flowing river of Jesus, of his blood, that he has paid the price. Help us to remind of our journey that we have gone through and you have carried us through every day. Remind us of our success and failure so we know that there is a moment here of the sunrise that is the hope of our day today and our day tomorrow. We may be even in a village today of hopeless people, but being with you, we know that the sun will rise. So God, today give us that hope and give us the hope of the next step of our journey. Let us not lose hope that wherever we are, Jesus is our salvation. Embed this in our souls and our minds and our spirits. In your name, Jesus. Amen. I want to thank you for joining us today. Be with us next week when we take another step in the journey to the sunrise. Blessings to you.